Ethics and Legal Issues by Crystal Brown, Holly Burlingame, Beth Ann Ridings, Sandeep Vargas, and Caitlin Woodside. What are ethics? Ethics is a systematic study of what a person's conduct and actions should be with regard to self, other human beings, and the environment. It is the justification of what is right or good and the study of what a person's life and relationship should be, not necessarily what they are. Ethics is a system of moral conduct and principles that guide a person's actions in regard to right and wrong and in regard to oneself and society at large. Ethics is about doing the right thing. In nursing, recognizing and being cognizant that your own personal value system may affect your decisions will help to ensure that you make ethical decisions. Even though we are still nursing students, everyone understands that nurses are advocates for their patients. Nurses are oftentimes expected to have multiple advocacy roles. Being accountable to our profession as nurses, we are also accountable to some degree to the physicians and to the organization as well as our patients. These multiple advocacy roles can lead to interpersonal conflict. If you think about it, every group aforementioned may have conflicting needs, wants, and goals. Nurses have their own code of ethics. The ANA Code of Ethics guide nurses as a profession to adhere to standards of practice that are highly ethical, even though they are not legally binding. How do you make ethical decisions? Theological versus deontological theorists. Theological ethical theory, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Deontological ethical theory judges whether or not an action is right or wrong regardless of consequences. Ethical frameworks help you make ethical decisions. Utilitarian, basic premise, is the greatest good for the most people. Rights-based framework, basic premise, is basic inherent rights. Duty-based framework means duty to do something or refrain from doing something. Intuitionist framework, basic premise here is to determine relative goals, duties, and rights case by case. There are 9 ethical principles that help make ethical decisions. Respect for people is the most basic and universal ethical principle. The 9 ethical principles include: number 1, autonomy, self-determination, freedom of choice; beneficence, actions to promote good; non-maleficence, actions to avoid harm; paternalism, assuming the right to make a decision for another; utility, good of many outweigh the need of the individual; justice, seek fairness; veracity, tell the truth; fidelity, keep promises; and number 9, confidentiality, keep privileged information private. Legal and legislative issues. Less ambiguous and more clear than ethics, law and legislation purposefully focuses primarily on protecting the patient as well as the nurse. There are only 4 sources of law, which include the Constitution, statutes, administrative agencies, and court decisions. We have witnessed a profession in constant metamorphosis. Nurses have worked to gain more autonomy and authority in all healthcare settings, and in the process are held accountable for more now than ever. Physicians were often held liable for nursing care in the past, but that is not currently the case. Many nurses now carry their own individual malpractice insurance.
The American Nurses Association created the Code of Ethics for Nurses with Interpretive Statements, or simply known as the Code, which serves as an ethical guide for all in the nursing profession now and towards the future. The Code currently has 9 provisions which addresses the ethical values, obligations, and duties of anyone entering the nursing profession, and it also serves as the non-negotiable ethical standard for the nursing profession, as well as expressing the nurse's commitment to society as a whole in their role as a nurse. The code is considered a social contract between nurses and the public that the nurses serve, promising to always advocate for our patients as well as provide safe, quality care to our communities. Not only does the code bind nurses to their communities, but also to other nurses to provide nurse-to-nurse support in upholding these ethical standards. The nursing profession is a very trusted profession all across the board, and this code of ethics outlines the ethical history that nurses are known for. As healthcare trends and standards of nursing practice change to more modern trends of healthcare, the code will be continually updated by the ANA, serving as the nurse's guide in traveling through the most difficult ethical situations at any time. Here's an image that outlines each of the 9 provisions in the ANA's Code of Ethics for Nurses. Each provision addresses a different topic that continually strives for excellence in the nursing profession to patients, whether individuals, families, or communities, to the nurses themselves, and to the profession as a whole. Although these ethical standards are not necessarily legally binding, as mentioned previously and in our textbook, ethical standards have upheld the integrity of the nursing profession throughout its entire history. The ANA continually revises this code through the years to ensure that anyone entering the nursing profession and continuing to practice in the nursing profession can follow these standards of ethics to provide best nursing care to both patients and also upholding that integrity of the nursing profession. Ethics issues in nursing practice. Nurses in practice have a very difficult job that many times they are caring for people on their worst days in a very emotionally taxing situation. Nurses often face ethical issues and it can cause emotional distress and fatigue. Sometimes a nurse that has a difficult day, it's really difficult for them to just leave it at work. It carries on over into their home life, into their personal lives. In a qualitative study conducted at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in California, researchers provided questionnaires to nurses who were interested in receiving an ethics consult on their prospective units. These researchers wanted to know why nurses were needing ethics consults, and the results yielded that nurses sought ethical consultations in mainly these following areas: the requests regarding plan of care, regarding end-of-life care, the need for discussion of patient goals, values, and preferences, regarding nurse-physician issues, such as communication issues, regarding honoring patient preferences, and regarding futility, where patient plan of care is not settled and there isn't a good outcome or conclusion that the care team can come to. The need for these ethics consultations vary from difficult, emotionally challenging situations such as end-of-life care to wondering what extent must the healthcare team go to uphold a patient's wishes, or to simply communicate difficulties with the healthcare team that's interfering with coming up with an adequate plan of care for a patient. This study outlines that nurses do experience ethical dilemmas in their daily work, which can be taxing, especially without the ethics committees to consult. Lack of ethical support in a nurse's practice can lead to severe work-related stress as well as burnout, and the need for ethics consults can provide nurses with support in advocating for their patient, as well as deciding which route is in the best interest of their patients. Legal issues in nursing practice. A nurse's most important job is to always be an advocate for their patient and to provide quality care that is safe. High patient-to-nurse ratios, or assigning a patient to a nurse that's unprepared or inexperienced in a certain area of care, both increase the patient's risk of acquiring an injury, or even death. To truly be an advocate, nurses must have the right to decline an assignment if it is unsafe for the patient for any reason. The Nurse Staffing Standards for Patient Safety and Quality Care Act of 2017, that was introduced in the U.S. Senate, is currently advocating for nurses to have this right protected by the law. If this bill were to become law, hospitals would be required to initiate a safe staffing ratio, and nurses that felt an assignment violated that ratio or that the patient would be endangered by a certain assignment due to the nurse's lack of education or experience in that patient's care need, the nurse would not be penalized, or the hospital could not take action against that nurse for being honest about her skills or standing up for the patient, recognizing that that would not be a safe staffing ratio for that patient. This bill would allow nurses not to fear penalties, but rather become better advocates for patients due to the ability to be truly honest without the fear of any repercussions.
Hey, this is Beth Ann. I'm going to talk to you for a few slides about the education of ethics and legal issues in nursing. So the education of ethics in nursing. Ethics is a critical part of education in nursing school and in the nursing field. Ethical issues may involve things such as misunderstandings associated with informed consent, conflict about treatment goals, power differentials between and among healthcare clinicians, patients, families, and others, lack of supportive resources and policies to guide practice decisions, truth-telling, and disparities in access to care. I think one of the biggest things we think about when we think about ethics in nursing is respect for people. If you Most of the time, if you approach situations where you're uncomfortable, or you think, wow, ethics really plays a role in this situation, if you just have respect for the person and the family, you'll usually be fine. But when education and ethics is not discussed in nursing school, it can lead to frustration with working with patients. I'm sure nurses feel this all the time because ethics isn't something that's very black and white, especially in the healthcare field. Unlike they are with the legal side of things, it's either right or wrong. But with ethics, it could always be there could always be a gray area with things. So there are several goals that we can think of when teaching ethics to nurses or nursing students. I was reading out of a journal for the Nurses of Education, and one of the quotes from that journal stated, "To strengthen their moral and professional integrity, avoid moral distress, justify difficult ethical decisions, and collaborate with other healthcare professionals." I thought this was a good statement. It kind of sums up everything about ethics and how to teach it. And just to kind of be able to justify the decisions that you make, talk with others about it, and things like that to make sure that you're making the right call. Also, another way to teach ethics in nursing is to study case studies to help nurses to visualize and thoroughly examine their thought process during an episode where ethics and morals play a role. I really find this interesting and helpful. We do it in class. We just did it last week in a discussion post. There was something that we talked about that was an ethical issue, and just thinking about how these things are real. This is real life. These things could actually happen. Can help you process things and figure out how to handle these situations. Each nursing facility should have a person in charge of ethics as a whole. This person should meet with the nursing staff often to discuss scenarios and to train the staff on how to handle certain situations. So if you're already a nurse, hopefully your facility is doing this. It's things that when we get out in the field, hopefully we're able to be in charge of this ourselves or have someone who's on staff who's there to talk about these things with us. All facility rules and standards should be examined and often expressed to the nursing staff so that there's no confusion on what the nurses should do when faced with an uneasy situation. So as I was saying, hopefully someone's there to do that so that you don't have to worry with, did I do the right thing or did I not?
Education of legal issues in nursing. Knowledge of the legal aspect of nursing is an expectation of all nurses. If the nurse does not understand these legal issues, they are at risk of being involved in a lawsuit. The primary purpose of law and legislation is to protect the patient and the nurse, according to Marquise and Hudson in 2017. The Nurse Practice Acts for each state list the laws that each practicing nurse professional must abide by. According to Marquise and Hudson, nurses who are less personable with their patients and who have a harder time establishing relationships with them are at a higher risk for being sued.
This slide, I got this information from our textbook. There's a nice little article about what to consider when protecting yourself from being a subject of a malpractice claim. So here are just a few things to think about to keep from being the subject of a malpractice claim. You'll want to use the Nurse Practice Act as a guideline for your practice. Know your facility's policies and procedures. This is very important. Make the patient the top priority in practice. So like I was stating before, establish those relationships with your patients. Practice within your own scope of practice according to your education and certifications. This is also very important. You can't do things that you're not qualified to do. There are some things to do in nursing that you have to have further education to do. So just make sure you're following your scope of practice. Stay up to date on skills and continue your education to expand your scope of practice. So if there's things that you want to do that you're not doing, make sure you're getting the education that you need to be able to do that. Also, another good point they made was to purchase your own liability insurance to protect yourself financially if there's ever a claim against you. So, you're usually covered under the hospital or facility that you work at as a nurse, but it is good to have your own liability insurance just to be on the safe side. Just kind of adds another layer of coding for your protection, especially financially.
So what is leadership? The textbook discusses the relationship between leadership and management and further expands on the debate of which one is more important to the field of nursing. Is leadership a role and management a skill, or vice versa? And do you have to be a manager to be a leader, or what sets clinicians up to be the best? Leadership is a process of persuading and influencing others towards a goal and is composed of a wide variety of roles. Some of those characteristics associated with leaders are intelligence, knowledge, judgment, creativity, charisma, and etc. The book lists other characteristics of being a leader. It can also be stated by Fowler that a good clinical leader must continually find an intersection between good leadership and management skills to be successful. And as a nurse leader, it is important to be self-aware of your style of leadership, your ethics, and your legal responsibilities. Ethics plays an important role in leadership. A study done through the Journal of Medical Ethics and History of Medicine studied the obstacles and problems of ethical leaders from the perspective of nursing leaders. They define ethical leaders as someone who can help create an ethical atmosphere, offer ethical guidance, and ensure the occupational satisfaction of personnel through prioritizing moralities. Ethical leaders must strive to model and support ethical performance and at the same time be sensitive to moral issues and enhance nurses' performance by fostering respect for the staff. Ethical leaders can play an important role in promoting patient safety, increase the capacity to discuss and act upon ethics in daily activities, and support the ethical competence of nurses. The aim of this study was to identify and The aim of this study was to identify and describe some problems and obstacles in ethical leadership faced by nursing leaders and to help them achieve more accurate information and broader perspective in this field. This was a qualitative approach in content analysis. One of the main categories was ethics, and ethical problems pertain to doubt in ethical actions, ethical conflicts, and ethical distress. Some positive attributes of ethical leaders can also be seen as ethical leadership leads to reduced work leave and increased job satisfaction in nurses through decreasing moral distress and creating an ethical social environment. This style of leadership helps the staff to perform better and leads to better care of the patient and also nurse retention. An ethical style of leadership boosts confidence in the leader, organizational commitment, and psychological empowerment among the personnel. Not only does this have an impact on the staff, but the leader themselves. They will feel more confident in their choices and ethical decisions, and that will show effect on the whole healthcare facility. Leadership plays a role in creating a culture of care, and leadership ethics and confidence in nursing leaders are important components of a healthy work environment culture. Since ethics was a category of importance to the study, it was found that the reason that acts performed by nurse leaders affect staff, patients, and other people. If these acts affect others inconsistently or harm them in an uncontrolled manner, ethical problems arise. The study looked at doubting the ethical act, which is often the consequences of the ethical act are unclear, and this will make leaders doubt their ethical performance. It also looked at ethical conflict, which participants admitted that sometimes they are involved in situations where the needs and expectations of nurses are in conflict with each other. Participants stated that sometimes there is a conflict between their values and beliefs and those of the organization. As nursing directors, they are expected to act in accordance with organizational values and justify them for the personnel, even though they might have different opinions. And last, it looked at ethical distress, which participants stated that when they are faced with obstacles that force them to act against their ethical beliefs, they feel discomfort, dissatisfaction, and frustration. They acknowledge that they are often involved in situations where they know the right way to do things, but organizational policies and rules and lack of support from superiors make it impossible for them to perform their duties appropriately, and this causes them distress and discomfort. The main purpose of law and legislation is to protect the patient and the nurse. Laws and legal legislation define the scope of acceptable practice and protect individual rights. Nurses who are aware of their rights and duties in legal matters are better able to protect themselves against liability or loss of professional licensure, which is extremely important for the nurse leader who has legal responsibility for the quality control of nursing practice at the unit level. Nurse leaders/managers have additional legal responsibilities. These include the task of reporting dangerous understaffing, being aware and knowing staff credentials and qualifications, and carrying out appropriate discipline when needed. Managers have a duty to reduce liability and to be fair and just when dealing with diversity in the workplace.
Issues in healthcare is respecting professional boundaries. Professional ethics and sexual exploitation laws prohibit inappropriate involvement with clients such as dating. Accepting gifts, for example, money for services provider is not allowed. An acceptable gift may be when a patient who is happy with the care provided provides food for the entire unit. That is considered an acceptable gift. We should always maintain appropriate boundaries. Patients can easily mistake treatment provided for physical attraction. This is especially true when it comes to mental health, patients who are dealing with physical and psychological issues. and they can mistake the care that we provide for physical attraction. Patients should also respect boundaries of their healthcare provider. In cases where not intervention is required, if mutual respect is not shown or if boundaries are crossed. Most important aspects of patient care is protecting patient information. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which everyone knows as HIPAA, protects patient information. Social media, web, and mobile technologies are increasingly used in healthcare and patient-centered areas. Almost everyone today either has a Facebook or Instagram account. As a healthcare provider, we should not post any information of patient on social media, even if it doesn't identify the patient specifically. Due to the amount of technology that we use today, privacy and security issues can lead to breach of patient information. So disclosing patient information, either accidentally or intentionally, can result in jail time for the employee and also huge fines for the employee and the employer. On to informed consent. Patients have the right to know the truth about their medical condition. Patients can choose their own treatment options even if the physician disagrees. Information must be presented in a language that patients can understand. Ethical issues arise when nurses add new information about the treatment rather than clarify information already provided by physicians. Only a competent adult can sign the form that shows informed consent. Spouses or other family members cannot sign unless there is an approved guardianship or unless they hold a durable power of attorney for health care. So informed consent can only be obtained if patient understands all information regarding the procedure and only if the patient understands the benefit and risks of the procedure.